The legislative breakfasts are brought to you each week during the legislative session by the Bridport Grange, the Addison County Farm Bureau, with help from the Addison County Regional Economic Development Commission and the Addison Chamber of Commerce. And the format is question and answer format. We'll get a little report to start with from the two legislators that we have here so far. And three legislators we have here so far. And we'll see what their take on what's happened becomes. And then five legislators. So we'll have some question and answer time afterward. Each of you is asked to keep your questions to 2 minutes, and the answers are 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes answers from the legislature. We have a red light system. It will stay green until it's almost time for you to stop talking. It'll turn yellow and then red when it's time for you to stop and allow other people to start. So let's get underway and ask each of the legislators to come to the microphone and introduce themselves, tell us what committees they served on, and maybe one huge accomplishment of the legislative session. Peter, do you want to go first? Sure.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Peter Collin. I'm in the House. I'm on the House Education Committee, and I represent Cornwall, Salisbury, Leicester, Ripton, Goshen, and Hancock. Despite what you may be hearing in the news in terms of a couple of big bills that will be waiting until January to pass, a lot certainly was accomplished. A lot was accomplished towards clean water, towards weatherization. The budget, I think, sort of speaks volumes of priorities of Vermonters, and it also passed nearly unanimously, as it seems to do every year. So there's a lot of items that were accomplished that were somewhat obscured by the delay in passage of the family leave bill and the minimum wage bill. There's a real commitment to get right back to those come January. These are big changes. Big changes take patience and time, but I think that it was overall a session that yielded some excellent progress in Vermont. And I would just remind everybody this was the first year of a 2-year biennium, so those things that didn't get done perhaps this year still have a chance to continue next year.
Thank you, Peter. Senator Bragg.
Good morning. It's nice to be back for the finale. I'm going to read through pretty briefly a list of things that I worked on with colleagues. For me personally, it was the best session I ever had. So there was kind of a bit of a hangover from the way things finished up, but I'll read the list and then I'll be happy to come back to things as people are interested. So the Clean Water Bill, 96, the PFOA PFAS Bill, 49, regulating PFAS in all public water supplies. The plastics bill, which people have, single-use plastics bill, reducing our use of those. The weatherization for all bill, state energy efficiency program, the phase-out of hydrofluorocarbons, legislation to promote the use of advanced wood heat, the miscellaneous energy bill, medical monitoring for covering costs of exposure to toxics, the regulation of toxic substances in S55, and lead in drinking water. So there were many things that, from a health point of view, whether you're talking about environmental health or personal health, that were very positive steps forward. And I'm guessing at some point, I know there were some things that people had as high priorities that we did get to, and I think probably we'll come back to talking about that, but it was a great session. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chris. Senator Hardy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ruth Hardy. Along with Senator Bray, I serve in the State Senate. I serve on the Education Committee and the Agriculture Committee. So highlighting a couple things from those two committees, and then I can add to the list that Senator Bray just ticked off on the accomplishments that we had this session. In the Education Committee, I think my proudest bill that we worked on, Representative Conlon worked on this on the House side, is it was S40, which is the bill that is actually a huge public health program to test every single tap in all of our schools, public and private and child care centers around the state, to make sure that they do not have lead in the water that our children drink. As you know, Senator Bray mentioned this, and he was one of the sponsors of the original bill. Lead is a neurotoxin, and it can lead to really, really problematic health concerns for kids, developmental delays that are lifetime irreversible problems. So this is a huge public health program that we passed, and it is the strongest legislation in the country for this type of work. So that is a bill that I'm really proud of that the Education Committee accomplished. We also passed some major legislation looking at making sure our schools are inclusive of all students. It's called the Ethnic and Cultural Studies Bill, and that was Act 1 of 2019, so it was the very first bill that was signed into law by the governor. It passed unanimously in both the House and the Senate, and that will be work that is taken on in the next few years to look at the standards and policies of school districts around the state to make sure they're inclusive of students of color and LGBTQ students and others. So those are two really important bills we did in education. In agriculture, we passed a good number of bills. The pollinator protection bill that I've talked about in the past, making sure that we are not using neonicotinoid pesticides for residential use, because those are really harmful to bees and other pollinators. It also includes a lot of education and oversight of beekeepers to make sure that our bees and pollinators are protected. So that was a major bill that we passed in agriculture. We also had two miscellaneous agriculture bills that were, as we say up in Montpelier, sort of Christmas tree bills that included a lot of provisions to help all different kinds of farmers and also foresters. And if people have specific questions about those, I'm happy to address those. But we did things like overhauling some of the laws that cover slaughterhouses and on-farm slaughter of livestock, and many other provisions. We did work on upgrading our hemp program in the state. So we were really busy in agriculture and did a lot of great things for farmers across the state, and I'm happy to talk more about that. I also want to add, if I can get my iPad to come on, some of the things that we did beyond what Senator Bray talked about in environmental and water quality areas. In terms of healthcare, we passed a major bill for protecting the reproductive liberty of all Vermonters. It ensures ongoing access to women's reproductive health care, including contraception and abortion. This is groundbreaking legislation for Vermont, and we also proposed beginnings of a constitutional amendment in this area. The one bill that I was the primary sponsor on that I'm really proud was put in the budget expands dental care. It's the largest expansion of dental care for Vermonters in 30 years. This is major, and it was put in our budget, and I'm very proud to have spearheaded that in the Senate. We did work on smoking cessation, increasing the age from 18 to 21 for people to buy cigarettes. We also included vaping and e-cigarettes in the tobacco tax. We increased funding for our local mental health care organizations, including CSAC here in Addison County. We passed a 24-hour waiting period for the purchase of handguns to prevent the use of handguns in suicide. We created 2 new positions and a coordinator to expand our substance misuse prevention programs. We passed major child care legislation. This was included in the budget. It increases the funding for child care by a significant amount and changes the subsidies to make sure that low and moderate income Vermonters have access to child care. We increased monthly payments to the Reach Up program, which is for low income single parents. We passed major legislation and burn pits, which is something that most people don't know about, but if you were in the military during the 90s and the early 2000s, you may know about these massive fires that the military had people set to burn things that were left along after a conflict. Those caused cancer for a lot of the people who were there doing the burn pits. And we passed legislation helping veterans get access to health care and information about that. Okay, Chris went over a lot of these things. We did a lot of work in workforce development and economic development. Access to broadband, we passed a major bill, and these are things that passed both houses, so House members worked on these as well. We did work in domestic violence and housing, where we enabled people who were the victims of domestic violence to be able to get out of their leases or change their locks much more easily with the cooperation of landlords. This is major legislation for people who are victims of domestic violence. We eliminated the civil statutes for the childhood sexual abuse and removed the statute of limitations for manslaughter and sexual exploitation of a minor, allowing people who've been victims in a young part of their in their lives to access the criminal and civil justice system. And I will stop there and let Diane talk more. Sorry.
Okay. Representative Lambert?
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Diane Lambert. I represent Addison County, which is Ferrisburg, Fredonia, Panton, Waltham, and Addison. I've been 11 years, and I serve in the House Appropriations Committee. And I'd like to say that I echo everything that everybody said so far. And although the commitment to my committee assignment precludes me from being able to attend as many legislative breakfasts as I have done in the past, I do apologize for not being able to be here. But one of the offsetting things that commitment of time allows me to do is that pretty much everything that everybody has spoken about right now comes through our committee at one point or another, and I have the wonderful and the responsibility of having a fingerprint on just about everything that everybody has talked about. And from that view, I really do have like a PhD in government every single year, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't learn something new about this wonderful state that we live in and the proud work of everybody that they do on all of the committees and overseas. But you would mention, what is the thing that I'm the most proud of? All right, because we do all this great stuff. I'm not proud of all of it. But I'm the most proud of, there were 3 things when I went into this legislative session, besides my committee work and constituent work and things that you need to just do as a part of your job. But what did I want to do? I wanted to do 3 things. I wanted to first, my highest priority was the child care, and sponsored the bill in the House that initiated, one of the bills that initiated that conversation. And at times, it was a pretty risky. I worked over the summer, actually the past 2 summers, with advocates and other legislators that had been working on advancing what we need to do in the child care realm. And it's relatively uncommon for someone in the Appropriations Committee to actually be one of the 4 key sponsors of a money bill, but I thought enough about it that it was that much of a commitment for me that I wanted to move that forward. And as many of the things and ideas that we bring to the legislature, we bring them in the door, but then they take off on their own wings. And there's 180 wonderful people that are there with their ideas to advance it. And in the end, child care was one of the 2 major investments this year in the budget. The second thing was around the environment. We needed to really make sure, and you've heard about this just now, is the lake funding. The long-term funding source needed to be put in place, and that has occurred, at least through both of our chambers. And in what we can do to make the next steps on climate change. So those things occurred, And then the third thing was housing for me. That it is a critical piece of economic development, and for the citizens of our state, that the housing is a tough goal at times. And so the advancements and the investments that we've made in the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, we were able to put in additional funding this year, nowhere near as much as you'd like, but it was increased. So people spoke about, particularly for my area too, is the broadband bill. That communications, that small broadband bill is hopefully going to do a lot for small rural communities. Some of the things within the budget, the choices for care, being able to, right down to the last hour. Sometimes Representative Lanford just has to get a little tougher. But being able to get the 2% increase in the community services was extremely important to me to see that in the budget, as well as in the end, and I'm very pleased from the budget side in the Senate, was able to make additional supports in the area that I was rooting for, which is on the personal needs, small things, but people in a nursing home have not had an increase in their ability to keep a certain amount of money beyond $47 a month. For, I don't know, Jim could probably speak to that more than I can, for decades, and that was increased in the budget as well. Probably the most important thing, was that Vermont took a different course on assuring human reproductive rights in the country and in our state, and you've heard others speak about that. I brought a list of some of the things. It's not all inclusive, but some of the things that we think of when we want to ask ourselves, what did we do for economic development? Is there, because we do a lot of things in a lot of places, and sometimes we don't always keep track of it, but we had somebody really doing a pretty good job of keeping track of what we did for economic development and where it's located, as well as climate initiatives. When we hear, oh, you're not doing enough, well, we ask ourselves, are we doing enough? What are we doing? Can we be doing more? So I brought a list of what is in this year's climate initiatives, and a list of sort of a breakdown of the child care bill and what it does. All right, thank you, and I'm going to go get coffee.
Let me remind you, this is the part of the program where you get a chance to kind of focus on an issue or something that's been said and ask your questions. But let me remind you that since we're on television, that each of you is asked to move to a microphone in order to speak and not to try to ask questions from the floor. Move to a microphone, it makes for better television. And you're first.
Thanks, Tim. Dave Silverman from Middlebury. It used to be like gun control was the third rail of Vermont politics and nobody would touch it. And now it's nice to see that, we're getting some sensible gun control legislation through year after year. It's great. It seems like the new third rail of Vermont politics has turned into drug policy. And that's a real shame, because by the time the legislature comes back in January, we'll get another report about the number of overdose deaths in Vermont. There'll be another, 100 or so opioid overdose deaths in Vermont by the time the legislature comes back. And guys, I hate to tell you that the legislature didn't do anything significant on opioids this year. And it's really frustrating. We had an increase in overdose deaths from 2017 to 2018 if you exclude Chittenden County. Chittenden County had a 50% reduction, and the rest of the state had a 25% increase. We gotta change our policies. We need to save lives. We can't keep losing 100 Vermonters every year to this drug poisoning crisis. We need to make the drug supply safer. We need to give people choices that are less risky, and we're not doing any of it. I'm very disappointed that the legislature has punted on this. I'm very disappointed that the governor has punted on this, and I know the dynamics. I know the governor's lack of leadership makes it very difficult to push out strong reform, but god damn it, guys, people are dying.
Was there a question there?
No. Do something.
Does anybody want to have a question that they'd like to ask legislators, or a topic that they'd like to emphasize. John, you're moving to the microphone.
I'm angry.
John Wall from Addison. David, there's something underlying the opioid crisis that you didn't address, and that is the general health of our population. It's in dire straits these days. People are my age, almost everybody has some form of dementia, and it starts a lot younger than that. Since 1996, with the introduction of glyphosate, Roundup, GM corn, the health problems in the country has taken an exponential curve. And that exponential curve follows with a correlation of about 98 and 99% in most cases, the use of Roundup in the environment. It is now ubiquitous. It is everywhere. It's in our water, it's in our air, it's in our soil. We cannot get away from it. It's in our food. I shop at the co-op mostly and try to get organic to get away from it. But you can't do that now. Number one, you can't trust the organic label. And number two, anything you buy that has products like wheat and any of your grains are basically all sprayed with glyphosate as a desiccant to kill the wheat, to kill the product just before it's harvested, so you have a uniform harvest. I got in touch with the state to try and find out how I could start checking the foods that I eat for glyphosate. And I found out it's going to cost me $125 for a test for glyphosate in anything I send in. I'd like to know, I need to know what I'm eating that has glyphosate in it. And I think the legislature not only needs to address even further and stronger legislation next year for these pesticides, but also to give us, the people of Vermont, a chance to find out what it is that's really poisonous.
So would a legislator like to comment as to what you think can be done?
Thank you for the question. It's the poisoning of citizens broadly, I'd say, is one of the sad themes that came up this whole session. It came up in the form of the medical monitoring bill. It came up in the lead bill. It came up in the PFOA PFAS bill. It came up in discussions around glyphosate, which is in a category of, they're referred to the law as economic poisons. That it is more economical to use that poison to kill off whatever crop, and there's a math that says this is a cost-effective way of doing things. The problem is on all these chemicals that we end up exposed to is that, from what I've learned, we are overexposed to things in ways that they were never intended. We weren't intended to have these exposures. If something was used on a farm and never left, that's very different than when it becomes part of a lot of the food that we ingest. Or PFOA is one in the family of PFAS chemicals. There are 5,000 of them. They're in water, they're in bottled water, filtered water, they're in beer, they're in clothing, they're ubiquitous. And the PFAS bill we did this year said they discovered PFOA, one of the 5, in Bennington, and said, we're going to regulate your exposure in drinking water out of a well. Then we take these same laws, this year we're moving them over to all public water supplies. There's no reason to allow your exposure at a higher level than what we've already determined for safe for well water. But as I said, it's just 5 levels been defined so far, and there's 5,000 chemicals in this class. The way the EPA regulates is one by one. There are 90,000 chemicals in commerce. Since the Toxic Substances Control Act passed in '76, they've regulated 9 of 90,000. The way we end up regulating is literally that enough people get sick enough that they see a pattern, and then investigations happen, and then regulation follows. We're trying to change the story, and on the PFAS bill, we're saying let's figure out how to start moving from just regulating one by one to starting to regulate by class. When things are sufficiently similar, we could take a precautionary approach and say, set a standard that's equivalent for the class until the chemical is proven safe for use. So coming back around to glyphosate, when we look at water quality issues, this is, I'd say, you are touching on an area that we've been struggling just to set and regulate and manage phosphorus runoff from farms. Phosphorus is just an indicator that there's many things leaving farms, putting in place safe precautionary principles for public health, environmental health is really what we're trying to change the story on. We're making some headway, but there's an entire industry as well as the EPA that's oriented to use it until finally there's enough compelling evidence that there's a problem to cause its regulation. Not, let's make sure it's safe, like drugs, for instance, FDA approval, it has to be safe and effective before you can sell it. We don't use that for many other chemicals.
Thank you, Senator. Yes.
Dan Longer, New Haven. I was a biochemist in a prior life. Most of the work that's done in the human body is through enzymes. DNA provides the template to make those enzymes, but they're the ones that get the work done converting a reagent to a product at body temperature. PFOAs, perfluoroalkyl acids. The concentrations that are measured in well water right now is on the order of 25 parts per trillion. Dissociation constants with enzymes take place at the level that is 1,000 times higher concentrations in parts per billion. Okay? And the human body is just a mixture of a lot of different chemicals at different concentrations, and it's the concentration that makes all the difference in the world. Okay, so it's, and the way in which PFOAs inactivate enzymes, if they do at the right concentrations, is by binding to the active enzymatic site that converts the reagents to products. Because it's electronegative. Fluoride, chloride, oxygen are electronegative, they bind to the active site. So bottom line is, spending time and energy on looking at PFOAs at 25 parts per billion is, as Shakespeare said, much to do about nothing.
Okay, more questions? Yes.
Joanne Kenyon, Bridport. In the discussion about passage of raising the smoking age from 18 to 21, I never heard any conversation about what happens to the group of people who are addicted to cigarettes who are 18, 19, and 20. Is there anything in that bill that helps them or supports them? Addiction, as we hear about a lot with opioids, is not a simple, straightforward thing of, oh, I won't do it now. I'm not legal to do this anymore, so I just won't. It's much more complex. So, somebody, thank you.
Representative Land.
Well, thank you for bringing up that point. The first thing that pops into my head is the quit line and all of the investments that we make in tobacco cessation that you can call, a lot of hotlines, get help, there's actually free patches. I mean, it would be lovely if there was no one smoking for all of the costing disease that it creates, but I would say that would be right there if their help to quit is to call the quit line and find out what's available for them to actually assist with that. And on the other issue, it's in the same vein as drug addiction on heroin, not to equate it to just a dollar amount, but it is unbelievably astronomical the amount of money and state dollars, tax dollars, that goes into the fight or in the response to addiction. With, I think David had brought it up earlier, on the opiate base. Just in one small budget within ADAP, that's the alcohol and drug abuse, your Medicaid budget for dealing with some of the addiction, $50 million in Medicaid dollars, but $30 million of it is just for heroin response. it's just an enormous amount of tax dollar investment, but I just wanted to make sure I told you about the tobacco.
Senator?
Thanks. I just want to add a couple things to your question and also your question on the other side of the bowl there. As Representative Blandford said, obviously, clearly those people would be eligible for the current addiction programs that exist and these are ubiquitous in schools and educational institutions, but also workplaces and also any medical and public health facilities. So yes, we want those people to be able to get into the system and be able to quit, not just not buy cigarettes. But one of the big reasons behind increasing the smoking age and also including vaping and e-cigarettes in the tobacco tax was that there was an enormous increase in teen smoking over the last couple of years because of the huge onset of vaping products. So this move, both with a new taxation and increase in age, was actually to prevent more young people from becoming addicted to cigarettes and tobacco products. So we're hoping that not only is it helping preventing people who are currently smoking, but preventing people from becoming smokers in the first place. So that a lot of it was this sort of prevention behind it. And in terms of, there you are. So there is a bill that's sort of on the wall right now about glyphosate, or I think there may be a couple bills that have not died. They will come up again next year, and it's possible. I believe they're in the House Agriculture Committee. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. So many numbers. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I can look them up for you if you want. I know that Representative Cordes, who's not here, is one of the co-sponsors of one of those bills. So those have not died. They may still come up next year. They're on the House side at this point. We also, as I mentioned earlier, did significant work with neonicotinoid pesticides and really passed a bill that was almost, I think there was one person in the entire legislature who voted against it, and the governor just signed it last week. So we made some really good progress with that. We also, there's language in one of the miscellaneous agriculture bills about, it seems subtle, but it is, I think, really important to getting at what you're talking about, which is actually a report about seeds and treated seeds, and whether or not they're treated with pesticides and what kind of pesticides they're treated with. And it's both to get an idea of the percentage of seeds that farmers use and have available to them that are not treated, and are they using them, and if not, why not? But also to get at some pesticides that are not commonly used yet in Vermont, and making sure that we know when they may be coming into Vermont. And the one I'm specifically thinking of is dicamba, which is mostly used on soybeans and has caused a huge problem out in the Midwest. So we are trying to be proactive to make sure that we know what kinds of pesticides are coming into the state, so we can prevent the wide use and literally farmers fighting with each other for who's using dicamba and who's not. So we are doing some proactive work to try to get at some of the concerns that you raised. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Just a clarification for those of us who might not know what's in the purchase of nicotine of cigarettes for youth. Is it just purchase? They can still smoke, but you just can't buy cigarettes. Is that what's the detail on that?
I'm going to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's purchase of cigarettes that you're not allowed, and also sellers are not allowed to sell them. So a store owner also would be liable for selling to somebody underage. Just like with alcohol, you have to look at an ID and make sure that the person you're selling to is 21 or older, and the penalties would be similar to what they are right now if you're selling to somebody who's 18, under 18, or selling alcohol to somebody under 21. So it's on both sides responsibility. Yeah.
I just would add one thing. That's just because I had the exact same question about the people who are currently 18 and addicted to cigarettes. And this law is pretty much a cut, unlike when we raised the drinking age to 21, and it was gradual over a number of years, so that if you were 18, you were never illegal. The response I got was that the health department will make a bigger effort to specifically target this age group with smoking cessation assistance.
Thank you, Peter. John?
I just want to say thank you, Ruth, and the legislature for getting on this issue. I know you are, and Les, you're out at it proactively. The one thing you probably know, I'm not sure many people in this room know, is that for these pesticides to get on the market, the company that produces them, the FDA says, oh, you just tell us what is, they're okay. You test them for us, tell us that, and then we'll approve them. And that's the way these pesticides get on the market. And that's one of the problems that we have, that I think at the state level, you can maybe start protecting us from these things. Thank you.
Yes.
Spence Putnam from Weybridge, and I must say that the list of accomplishments that the legislators have read off today is really quite impressive. It's clear that it has been a productive legislative session. Unfortunately, and John Flowers, you can quote me on this, the things that grab headlines tend to be the things that didn't get over the finish line, or the things that were weaker than we had hoped. And here's the part I think John's going to put in his article. I think we're very fortunate in Addison County to have thorough and fair coverage. Is that going in there, John? No, I do appreciate John's work on reporting on legislative issues. But so the area that I am concerned about is generally confronting the climate crisis. And I know that a lot has been done in the climate area, but I think it's important for the legislature to really have a strong voice and make this a higher priority. And I know that there are limits financially and so forth, but to hear that it's not even on the priority list in the House is very concerning to me. So I'm interested in what legislators have to say about what can be done to really confront the climate crisis and make some meaningful steps to addressing it in Vermont.
Legislators. Senator Branch.
So I'm sympathetic to what Spence is bringing up. You know, I've thought a lot about it. We refer to weatherization, so improving indoor air quality and reducing fossil fuel use to heat a home as, you know, a win-win-win-win. You can't look anywhere where there's not a win. You save money because you're reducing fossil fuel. You're emitting less. You improve indoor air quality. There's a community benefit because there's less emissions. It's a long list of positives, and yet it took 5 years to get an increase in the weatherization program. So we got one this year, and I would say it was important. It's incremental progress in the right direction, but it's at the wrong scale. And when I think of the big issues like a clean energy economy, which includes clean electrical generation, thermal and cooling loads at home, and transportation. So that I'm going to just say that I think the legislature makes incremental progress on these things, but meaningful progress at scale and at speed usually comes out of the executive branch. You know, I look back at big changes in Vermont. For instance, the best example I can think of really is Dr. Dinosaur. So we have universal health care for children and mothers. We've been doing this since 1989. It came out of the Cunit administration. We have not been able to figure out any other universal health care thing since then, and we keep doubting that we have the ability to do that kind of work. I think it takes a governor with conviction to drive a program and give Vermonters in general confidence, and the legislature in confidence, to make a game-changing move. So fairly often, I think we do something at between 1/5 and 1/10 the scale we need to do in order to be really game-changing. And I'd say that's the same thing, unfortunately, on climate change. So we have, one of the wonky detail of what we passed in the weatherization bill. It kicks off a PUC proceeding, Public Utility Commission proceeding, that says, what could all fuels energy efficiency programs look like for the state of Vermont for the next 20 years? And I hope when we get that information back, that will be a point that an administration and the legislature can gather around and make a game-changing investment in what we're doing, not just on climate, but in building a stronger, healthier local economy at the very same time.
Diane?
Thank you. So I know that most of you know that besides being at the legislature, I am the caregiver for my 2.5-year-old grandson who's a ball of fire. And every time I look at his face, I think about the future as well. And it concerns me. When I became a little more active in the year 2000, 2001, when I was on the City Council of Virgins, the energy concerns, and at that time it was all about, oh, we don't want to use those curly-Q light bulbs. We have come a long, long way, but we have not come, as the Senator has said, fast enough with as much muscle. I do have here some of the things, Spence, that I spoke of earlier, of what we've done this year. So what I can say is that from on the House side, or in our committee, we commissioned last year to take a look at what decarbonization measures would be needed. What do we need to do? That came back and it's called the RAP report, and heard earlier on, should we put a really heavy tax on carbon? What would that do? What would it do if we put incremental steps on carbon and use that investment, or we did nothing? And I'll save you the, spoiler alert on the ending. What got the biggest response and bang for the buck is to maybe put a small incremental charges on things, as well as making investments in 2 areas in Vermont: weatherization, as you heard, and our transportation sector, electrifying our transportation sector to get our emissions down. So those 2 things were the biggest push to be able to get done. It's where we've made some investments. Weatherization, I'd like to see even more, but we've made investments this year far greater than we've done in the past. And on the electrification system, we have to balance that with also the charging station investment as well as the incentives for vehicles. And some people wanted to do more than the $2 million that we put, but I don't think the program has been ramped up enough yet for people to be able to access it and to use it, that I wouldn't want to put $5 million on the line in that budget and have it not be used over the year. I think next year we can come back and look at it. Maybe we can make $3 million more and take a look at how that's going. But that's where we need to go. And I'll leave this with you, Spence. Thanks. Thank you.
Senator Brett?
I'm going to cheat and come back a second time. So on weatherization, money for weatherization. We looked at, the House sent over, they increased the tax on heating fuel by 2 cents a gallon, from 2 to 4. There was an uproar in some parties, enough so that motion, that proposal got defeated, and we found other ways to bring some money into weatherization. Actually, a little more in the end, but I just want to offer up the perspective. So that was raising $4 million statewide over a year. Meanwhile, while we're having this debate, I'm watching the price of gasoline at the pump go up. The math went up 35 cents just during the period we were discussing heating fuels. So while we could not gather the political will to raise, add 2 more cents to the heating fuel tax to vastly improve our weatherization program, the transportation fuel industry, ExxonMobil, etc., raised prices enough so that we will spend for the very same gasoline in the coming year and diesel $133 million more. There's not a peep over the increase of gas price. But for $4 million, where 100% of that money was going to be retained in Vermont, spent in Vermont, deliver benefits to Vermonters, was politically impossible. So there's a strange disconnect. This is part of the challenge of serving. How do we come together? How do we make good choices? Why is it that we don't seem to mind $133 million more in gas, and pretty much all those dollars leave the state? $4 million more in heating fuel that will invest and help ourselves was untenable. So it's a puzzle, a genuine puzzle.
Thank you, Senator. You've been patient and waiting.
Well, at least it's my topic that's been talked about. So my name is Sally Burrell from Bristol. So, as we're incrementally helping with energy, the big giants like Enbridge are not incrementally moving along, I'm afraid. They're really wanting to push out exporting fossil fuels and that kind of thing. And I don't know if anyone here knows, would like to speak about that plan that Enbridge has to buy out a lot of the shares of the parent company of our Vermont, two large utilities, Vermont Gas and GMP. There's a movement by Enbridge, a huge fossil fuel industry or company, to end up owning 39% of the shares of the parent company of our two utilities and other. And there's a talk that would remove all of our public shares. What does that mean? I'm wondering. And I'm concerned about how do we protect ourselves from having, Vermont being a corridor for exports of tar sands or liquid natural gas, or any of that going through Vermont. So those are big things that people in those industries are not taking little incremental steps. They're going to do what they can. How do we protect ourselves in Vermont from that?
Good question. Any legislators wish to attempt?
I have a technical answer, but I think it's part of a meaningful change in proceedings. So when we look at energy, we don't have currently a shared method to evaluate the full life cycle cost with a full cost benefit analysis. So we don't look at, for instance, when you're burning fuels, the emissions to the air that have damage and impact on the environment and public health. There's zero. There's no place where you see that in the math that gets done, whether we should approve a project or not. So what we're looking in that same bill I mentioned, the weatherization bill, it includes the Public Utility Commission proceeding, and it tells them to develop the math that will do full cost benefit. So it's fair and square. We just want to know the pluses and minuses of any fuel choice. And we want to know the full cost from the moment you drill for something and extract it to the moment you burn it. Let's not just talk about burner tip efficiencies on natural gas, for instance, because there's plenty of other impacts on the way from the drill site to your burner. And once we get that agreed upon analysis tool, and then start using it in the legislature, the Department of Public Service, and in the Public Utility Commission, we'll finally have a way of having a rational discussion about energy rates. We don't have that analysis tool yet, and been plugging away for 3 years to get it, and now finally it's part of our Public Utility Commission proceeding. So I think that will address the kind of concerns you have around any kind of fuel choice.
I just have one little addition to that. The other part of it would be, like Enbridge just had a huge spill of 1 million gallons of tar sands into some river basin. That's the kind of thing too that I'm concerned about, not just, which is very important what you said. I'm so glad you worked on that. And also though, what would happen if, we were just exposed to more of that kind of stuff if more happened in Vermont.
So
Chris?
So that analysis tool that I was talking about would be happening, all the large energy projects happen in the state, and even actually right down to small projects, net metering solar projects, there's a certificate of public good that comes out of the Public Utility Commission hearing. And so they would be looking at, for instance, a spill. If that's a predictable event, then that's a sort of externalized cost that is zeroed out currently that could be considered and examined as we made energy choices going forward. Plus, there is the overall framework of aiming for 90% renewable by 2050, which is actually a plan that I hope we shorten up and aim to get to cleaner energy for the state of Vermont well ahead of that, because of the economic as well as environmental and public health benefits that will go with it. So it's in that certificate of public good process where a tool like this could be make a real difference.
Bruce, did you want to say something?
Yeah, on a different topic though, if that's okay. I just wanted to mention 3 small things that are very Addison County specific that some people here may be interested in. I know we all heard a lot from people who were concerned about the potential closure of the Salisbury Fish Hatchery, and your Addison County delegation worked really hard to make sure that there was at least a short-term fix to that, to create funding in the budget to keep that fish hatchery open, and to look to ways to make it more sustainable in the future, or to have a longer process for its closure if that's necessary. So that is both in the actual budget, but also the capital budget, which is looking at the facility itself. Just for those of you who are anglers, fisher people, I don't know what the gender neutral term is for that anymore, but for people who fish, it's a really important facility because it grows the baby fish that then are put into our rivers and streams and lakes for people to catch. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we got a one-time increase to funding for our mosquito districts. Addison County has 2 different mosquito districts, and we got an increase of $50,000, and that will be used. I just talked to the Agency of Agriculture late last week for if there's a sort of quote-unquote emergency situation for larvicide, which is the eggs, not the spraying along the roadsides. The state only funds the larviciding. That is something I know Representative Conlon worked really hard to get that in the budget on the House side. And then finally, and this is really small, but those of you who enjoy field days know that last year when we went to field days, there was a new welcome center, the Foster Welcome Center, and it's a gorgeous facility. What you may not know is that there are actually bathrooms in that facility, because those bathrooms were not open last year because of a problem with the potential for wastewater treatment. So I worked really hard to get into one of the ag bills a provision that will allow us to be able to use those bathrooms next year, this year actually, this August, by finding a solution that's both cost-effective and environmentally sufficient to deal with wastewater. So that was a big issue for Addison County. So I look forward to going and peeing at the field days.
Thank you, Senator.
I'm sorry, that was very good. But you are sparking my memory, because we forget, because we sometimes, some things take glacier speed and other things happen just like that. Some of the things early on in the session that were accomplished, but at the time were significant rows and very intense, and Senator mentioned the Salisbury Fish Hatchery. So you can imagine when they came in to present their budget in our committee room, and one of their cost-saving measures was to close this. So when I mentioned that, not only do I know it, and as a member from Addison County, to work with our whole delegation on this, but I mentioned to him that the trout from my wedding dinner came from that fish hatchery, and I think the advocates in the room were like, I think she's on our side. But that was some of the things that, yes, that at the moment was very intense and needed to get through. But some of the other things that I'm remembering when you mentioned that was that at the very beginning of the session, we had a government shutdown at the federal that it absorbed a little bit of our time and energy and what we were going to do in response to help federal employees in the state who were without a paycheck and being mandated to go to work. And there was a real concern around that. And I can honestly say that working House Senate and the governor this year, we were able to, within 6 days of our opening of a new biennium, to not just the next one, the next level, but to be able to come with a response to for those federal employees that luckily they didn't need. But that type of response and working together, you know, it takes a little effort and time. But, and I'm looking forward to going to the fair too this year. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't think we can leave this session without talking about water quality. I was hoping that we could get a quick overview of what the bill did and where the funding is coming from, and before we leave today. But
if I could ask my question, because I have to
sure.
say about water quality. So I'm Ellen Cronin from Cornwall, and my question is, well, first, I'm very happy that we have some funding for water, that's great. But it seems like we are not overall in terms of Vermont government on the same page about water. And early on in the year, I think it happened maybe in December, the state lab moved, and that caused some problems that I saw from the Addison County River Watch perspective. So this is the Addison County River Watch has been collecting samples for well over 10 years on the streams within Addison County and a little bit in Chittenden County. And we found out early in the season, starting in April, that we were no longer going to have E. coli testing the way that we had in the past, and that other parameters were reduced because we did not have the funding from the state level to test our samples. And this is after, I think a year ago, Julie Moore made the comment that we did not have the information available to fund, you know, to make decisions about what we wanted to fund in terms of projects from a water quality perspective. So a program that's been going on for more than a decade ended up not being able to be fully funded in this kind of environment. So I don't really understand that even though we've got water funding, we don't have full support of this from the state level when an existing program lost its funding. The state lab is having problems in supporting water quality, and we're now going to have areas where we no longer get a full set of data on our water quality with regard to turbidity, E. coli, and a number of other things. So I'm wondering whether we could get some information about that. And that would also help us provide that information.
Any questions?
So thank you for that. That came, Heidi Willis brought that up a number of times during the week earlier this session. We took testimony, we had the Secretary of Agency of Natural Resources in and looked into it. So in short, there are more water quality groups sending in more samples to the new state lab, and they have a full-time person at that lab running state tests, and then with their extra time, they run tests on behalf of local water quality groups. Basically, they're under-resourced for the growth in the number of water quality groups sending in the number of water samples, so they are being more strategic about what they test for, where, and when. And it's led to their choice to say that they're reducing E. coli and turbidity testing in some places in the state. They're doing more targeted testing on some regions and backing off in terms of their general level. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I think the testing has been important to improving water quality science around the state, and what we would need in order to be able to pick that back up again is more staffing at the lab. And you only get to bring staff on in full increments. They would have to hire another person. It's a big investment to bring in another water quality lab person on. And I think it was just a budget constraint. They're divvying things up. They're also open to changing it going forward. They've been modifying the program. If you give me your email after, I'll be happy to send you the Secretary's much more complete and detailed explanation of what they're doing, why. And of course, if you feel like we're missing important stuff, then that's good for me to know, because I think legislators can go to bat for more resources to do important water quality work. To come back to the moderator's question, so S96, the water quality bill, it's really two things. One, the bill itself is 99% oriented to how we improve the service we deliver. The state has the legal responsibility is a delegated agency from the EPA to do water quality work in the state of Vermont. And we've led that work for decades. We passed the Clean Water Act in 2015 to create more stringent, more demanding, and we hope more productive ways of managing water quality. This year we said, okay, the state is a relatively small agency when it has work to do everywhere around the state. We often talk about Lake Champlain because of where we live, but there's water quality issues everywhere in the state to be addressed. So the bill focuses on the delivery system, increasing the state's ability to basically block grant out money to local water quality groups that are doing the work. They're the boots on the ground. ANR still retains the responsibility of making sure that those groups are coordinated, performing at a certain level, getting funding, etc. And that's what S96 was in terms of improving the efficiency of the way we invest in water quality throughout the state. The second thing, the rub that we have every year is how do we fund it? There were a lot of, 2 years running, I put a proposal in to say, how about a per parcel tax? If you want to talk about raising money, make an offer. So I put that on the table. It was declined 2 years running, and the choice in the end became to use one of the 9 cents within the rooms and meals tax to apply that and designate it as clean water dollars. And that fills the gap. So there was no new tax increase. It was taking the existing revenue stream and dedicating a portion of it, 11% of it, back over to clean water work. And so the big improvement is that we now have a named dedicated funding stream in order to, so that we shouldn't be in a position of having to lobby, struggle, come up with the money every single year, which is what's been going on since 2015 when we passed the underlying bill.
So is that a permanent earmarking or just for the year?
So it is quote unquote permanent, and that no legislature can bind future legislatures through its actions. So for the time being, it's written in the statute. That's the way it's being funded. I don't know what a future legislature will think about that way of doing the work, and they might come up with something different. But I'm guessing that they'll let a sleeping dog lie, because it's been a hard struggle to name a steady funding stream to increase our water quality work. And I want to make sure I'm saying increase. So we used to spend in the neighborhood of 30 million. Now we're aiming to spend between 50 and 60. So a very substantial increase in water quality work around the state. And we can see that we have decades of work ahead, because it's a very large system, as you know, with lots of reasons that we have water quality challenges, and this looks to address the problems as well as to preserve high quality waters. We don't want to become so fixated on just addressing phosphorus, for instance, that we stop investing in wetlands and conserving land that helps keep water clean to begin with.
Thank you, Senator.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Kenyon from Bridport. I am also interested in the climate issue strongly, and it seems to me that there's some information that's missing, that the climate thrust would be advanced greatly if we had the information. One is, I'd like to see, and I think we all should see, the actual data that shows that carbon dioxide is driving climate, and to what extent it's doing that. And because most of the efforts that we're making to combat this crisis is dedicated toward what we're calling carbon, but basically the use of fossil fuels. So since I've been looking and I've not seen that information, but the availability of that information, I think, would help tilt the scales. It would enable people to really get it and how important this is. So I'm looking forward to seeing that information. I've asked already, and Chris knows, and I'm sure these folks are working on this. The other thing is that we have installed photovoltaics, for example, mostly in Vermont so far, with wind. It began, and then perhaps it'll be back again. It's time, I think, to know the efficacy of these machines to reduce carbon on our grids, reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are being used on the grids. And that will also help inform people as to how well we're doing in the direction in this regard. So with those two things, I think if we had that information, we would be further along on our better get people to back up what we're trying to do with regard to climate. Thank you.
Thank you. You're next.
Well, just to touch base on that, the CO2 temperature issues. I mean, people have been studying ice core data in Antarctica and Greenland, and I think it goes back 100,000 years. And correct me if I'm wrong, but 800,000 years?
Yes.
Okay. But correct me if I'm wrong, the temperature always starts to increase prior to the CO2 increase by 400 to 800 years.
Correct.
Okay, so figure that one out. But anyways, okay, I wanted to bring up the issue about budget. The budget this year, last I read, was $6,097,000,000, or $163 million above what it was last year. So I'm going to let any politician who wants to come up and try to explain that occurred without increasing taxes.
Thank you. And I think the Representative Lanford is here from the Appropriations Committee.
Thank you. I was actually going to I didn't prompt you to do that. I do have the sheet of what we did and the increase. So right to the chase, 2.6 increase. I would say we're in the last 3 years pretty much below inflation. This year we did increase fees. We did increase the e-cigarette. That would be more of a modernization of a tax than actually requiring that money. But here's an interesting fact. I think it's Dan and everybody. April's numbers for our forecast. Now, we don't spend money until we have an official forecast, basically what I call balancing the checkbook. Happens twice a year in Vermont, in January and in July, unless there was some extraordinary circumstances, which there was in the year 2009, that we did it, I think, 4 times in that year. Very often, as it does, tax day is April 15th, and we get an update at the end of April. It usually takes to about May 17th or May 7th before we get what those numbers look like. And this year and last year, they're very, very positive for a lot of reasons. Is Vermont doing so much better? Is the corporate doing so much better? Is this a sort of an anomaly because of the Trump tax and how it's differently affecting Vermont? There's reason to believe that some of the money, if not all of it, last year could have been from corporate repatriation of bringing things in. Another long story. But when we got April's numbers in at the end of the month, balanced out, typically a month to month we may be up 2 million, or down a half a million, and up 3 or down 2, but it balances off. At the end of April, we were up 50 million. $41 million alone in personal income tax, 12.9 million in corporate tax. What is that about? This is where we funded, at the end of the day, the clean water piece, that we could say a certain, I was very early on when those numbers came out, all of this is not one time. I don't know how much is, and I don't know how much isn't, but I'm pretty sure it's not all one time. We came to an agreement that we could probably use about 10 to 12 million of it as ongoing money that's going to reoccur every year, and we did not need to raise new taxes for the lake cleanup investment, the additional lake funding, because we already have a lot of money in there. Right, Chris? I need to look to him because he is the guru in Montpelier when it comes to water quality, not just Addison County, but all of Montpelier. So, but I know from what we did in the budget, We've got $50 million, and I can leave the sheet. I want to make sure that you look at this and make sure I got this. This is the most updated sheet. Overall, our goal years ago that we needed to get to in Act 64 and that summer study, we needed to get anywhere between $50 and $60 million out the door in Vermont every year for the next 20 years. And we're getting there. We've got this source of money. We've got $12 million in the capital bill. We have $17 million in other bills, and then there's about 6.2 in federal for a total 50 plus every year. We've accomplished that. We'll let the experts determine what we need to do with that. You want to know about the $6 billion? We should probably have coffee, or there's a JFO website. It is all accounted for.
I don't think there's anything you could say that would make everybody happy.
Oh goodness, no, because I know what it's like to only have $1 with $100 of people asking me, and most days my response is I have to make probably 99% of everybody unhappy, but I have to make the hard choices, and that's why you send me there. I know we got a couple of minutes, and I'll just end so that everybody has a chance to finish up, because this is the end wrap up. What are we going to do this summer? This is the non-campaign summer. This is when, right now, my arms are killing me. I power washed yesterday for my deck for like 4 hours, and I can't lift my arms. So my things that I'm going to do this summer is a lot of house maintenance that needs to get done. Spend a lot of time with that 2.5-year-old. But on the legislative level, there are 2 things that I'm responsible for. I currently chair the Vermont Child Poverty and Strengthening Families Committee. This would be the 3rd year, although if they'd like to choose another chair this year, it would make me unhappy. But I've enjoyed it immensely. So there's a commitment of time that I put into that. The other thing that I'm doing this year on behalf of my House Appropriations Committee and others, that I'm teaming up with Representative Teresa Wood from Waterbury, who is on the Human Services Committee, because I'll keep it short, the payment reform system for designated agencies like CSAC or Howard Center, CMS is putting some more accountability restraints at the state level. The state needs to they need to reform anyway to take a look at it, but this was a good reason. There's some angst and some anxiety around what that will mean and how that will happen. So Representative Wood and I will be spending at least once a month, if not more, staying engaged with that process. So in January, when we hit the ground, we're running, and I think that's about my time.
Thank you, Diane. We're just about out of time unless somebody has a really burning question that they'd like to ask. Okay. John, are you going to ask a question?
No.
Or make a comment?
No.
Okay.
I just want to say a thank you, sincere thank you to our legislators for the work you've done this session. I feel you're dedicated and hardworking. Appreciate that. And I'd also like just to mention, I found out, maybe it was announced at an earlier session that I didn't attend, that Bill Keyes had passed. And Bill Keyes, as most of you probably know, was a long-time legislative breakfast moderator and organizer, and just wanted to remember Bill.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Also, legislator David Ainsworth passed away over the weekend. Many of you knew him from over in Windsor County. That's it for today. We appreciate you all coming out, and I see all my loyal people that come out to every breakfast, regardless of where it is and when it is. Our breakfasts are brought to you this year, and hopefully again next year, according to Jim, that will be brought to you by the Bridport Grange once again in the Addison County Farm Bureau, and we hope that you'll come again next year. We'll try to do about the same format. Before I let you go, I do want to mention that there's a white plastic bucket out as you leave the room that you're certainly welcome to put $1 into on your way out. It helps support what we do as the Grange and Farm Bureau. And thank you very much for coming to the legislature.